there, everyone, and welcome to part 3 of our summer 2025 bonus episodes of the Horn Call podcast. If you've been keeping up with this series, you know that these are archived audio recordings of sessions held at IHS 40 in Denver, Colorado, hosted by Jesse McCormick and Susan McCulloch. These sessions were put together by IHS honorary member Douglas Hill, and they covered a number of different pedagogical pearls or teaching-related things. So in the third part of this series, we have information from Marian Hess, who was for many years at the University of Northern Colorado, talking about assessment in the Horn Studio, and that's followed with a very nice presentation by Bill Scharnberg, who was at the University of North Texas for many years, on dealing with failure. So here we go with our part 3 of our summer bonus episodes.
Well, my students are always concerned about their grades, and I think that all of us who do teaching are concerned about how to grade our students. So assessment in the Horn Studio actually refers to grading. I know everybody's going, oh, yawn, how dull. But the thing is when you're at a university, you're required to demonstrate to your students how their grade will be determined. And I love all my students, and I would really like to give everybody an A. But where's the value in their grade at that point? Because there are obviously people who work far harder, who accomplish things. There are some people who work very hard who don't accomplish as much as you would like. So hopefully everybody got the Canary Yellow Extremely Informal Survey, because I'm actually hoping to acquire information in hopes of putting something maybe in the Horn Call where people can see what is it that other people do. One of the things that I do, I put just briefly on that sheet, not that scales are the most important thing in the world, but what I've noticed among other professional players that I know is that we can all play our scales. And my students, when they start, sometimes cannot. And one time at the University of Kansas, where I used to have a little scale test, I overheard students in the hallway saying, okay, so that would mean on each scale we could miss this many notes. And I was, of course, horrified because that wasn't my image at all. My image was strings of beautifully articulated, wonderful scales with no missed notes. So then I decided that would be the goal. The scale only counts if the scale is 100% accurate. Now, if some of you are younger players, you may think, but I always frack at least one note. So I have 2 systems for doing this. The other reason for doing this is if you can't come into your horn teacher's studio and play something which we essentially view as basic information, that being scales, perfectly, how are you going to do in an audition? Whether you're a music ed student graduate who's auditioning for a small local orchestra, or whether you're a performance major and you're taking your first professional audition. Trust me, it's a lot scarier to go in and play Tchaikovsky Fifth perfectly for an unknown, hidden audition committee than it is to play your scales for me. So this has the benefit of they get to make themselves nervous with virtually no effort on my part. So they come into the studio and they play the scale. The idea is that they play the scale and the arpeggio perfectly, and then they can move on to the next one. If you're a music ed major, you get 30 seconds more than a performance major. That's the one slight difference that I make. So it's very entertaining for me because they really work at it. They get a limited number of attempts. I used to give them as many attempts as they want, and until the end of the semester, and then I discovered they all practice it the week before anyway, so now I just do it the 3rd week of class, and they get their grade. But that gives them a grade that they know, okay, I got a B on my scale test. I have another scale test coming up. I want to do better on that. I need to study for my studio test, and I think many teachers use some type of a studio test that relates to history of the instrument, knowledge of repertoire, familiarity with composers who have done things for the horn. And all of that is information that students need to know, but it's not covered, of course, in their music history class, because as much as I would like, I can't get them to focus on the horn. They keep focusing on chant. So I try to refine those points, and then it also ties in with their music history class, my goal being that if they can latch onto when Beethoven was, maybe that will actually be a benefit to them in their other class. So if anybody's interested in filling out this survey, I would really appreciate it, because I'm very interested in knowing what other people do in order to determine grades. Pass-fail might be a great option for private lessons, but since this is my first opportunity to ask people, I don't even know if there's any schools that actually allow that, because it probably does some really weird thing to people's grade point average and their scholarships. There's always something you don't think of. Another thing that I do is I have a metronome test where everybody has 6 or 7 different tempos. You take one of the metronomes with the tapping feature. When you go to an audition, you have a lot of time on an airplane. If you have your little tapping metronome with you, you can say, okay, I know I need to play this excerpt at that tempo. Can I make that tempo come out each time? And admittedly, there's a range of tempos a little bit on those excerpts, but if you can do it for me when your heart's beating fast, you should be able to think of that when you're going into your audition and your heart's beating fast. So I try to use the grades as an incentive for my students to achieve their best playing. And a lot of times, that seems to be something that really pulls them along. Whereas if I just, at the end of the semester, say, well, you get a B. I came across a survey on the internet that had no name or a link on it telling me where it was from. So I have no idea who did this rather excellent survey of private studio teaching, but they had numbers from this school about essentially how the students saw themselves and how the teacher saw them. And in some things, the numbers were very similar. They were looking for an 80% relationship. So if the teacher thought 77% and the students thought 82, you were in a ballpark. But a lot of times the students thought they should get an A, and the teacher thought they should get a C. And that's what I'm trying to avoid in my horn studio, because I don't like for people to be abruptly disappointed at the end of the semester. So by having things throughout the semester, it gives people an opportunity to improve. And then, of course, there's the jury grades, which you can deal with in any number of ways. You can have your vote not count, but all of your faculty colleagues each contribute 10% towards their total 100% of their grade. And so, at any rate, that looks like that's just about 7 minutes. And you guys have this survey. If you want one, you can come and see me. I can make more copies tonight. But I would really like to have it, and if anybody wants to have an email chat or anything, I'm very interested in what it is that you are doing in your own studios to help your students achieve their finest performance level. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just really briefly, because you actually did have a couple seconds left. I've just read a book, and I have never done this, and it's just kind of interesting. I'm going to throw it out there. It's a wonderful book called that Jeff Snedeker told me about, and it's called The Art of Possibility by Xander. It's a couple of different people. One of the things that he suggests in there, which I'm not saying like I know this is going to work one way, but he worked with some classes and gave them all A's. He said when they came in, they were all getting A's. And the second week, he made an assignment and said, imagine yourself at the end of the semester and explain to me why you deserve that A, and submit that to me next week. And left it at that. And at the end of the semesters, he had to give them all A's, but he put them into a situation where they're all A students, fine, but they have to justify why they think they are A students, as well as him saying, of course, I assume you're going to be A's, so that sort of sets the poll way up there. But it's just kind of interesting. It's a different kind of an incentive way of looking back at in a backwards way. It's just something I started thinking about.
Mountain biking t-shirt that I finally wore out. It had a great horn motto on it. It said, it's not if, it's when and how bad. A couple other adages that I use with my students to kind of keep things going in area of performance. In your life, at the end of your career as a horn player, you will have played all the right notes. Some of them will just have been in the wrong order. And then there's the famous theory of displaced water, that in any given performance, the water will be in your hands, in your horn, on the floor, in your bladder, but not in your mouth. I hate failure. It really scares me. If I make a mistake, I principal horn in the Dallas Opera. If I miss one note in an opera performance, it drives me crazy. I know that sounds a little over the top, but that's just the way I am. So failure has been a topic that I've been interested in since the beginning of my career. Let's have a little quiz here. How many of you believe that you have performed a successful performance sometime in your life? Okay, we should see everybody's hand, right? Okay, how many of you have given what you believe to be a successful performance, but either a colleague or a teacher or the recording says that it wasn't so successful? Anybody there? Yeah, right. How many of you have performed what you consider to be a failure? Probably most of us. Okay, how many of you have performed what you consider to be a failure, but your teacher or your colleagues or the recording said that it wasn't so bad? Okay? So, we can see right away that success and failure are only approachable by degree. They're not permanent nor terminal. I created this little lecture about 20 years ago for a Towson State University workshop. But I refer it to myself and my students quite often, and I think it helps me the most. From which of those experiences, your success or your failure, did you learn the most? Okay, let's raise your hand if you learned most from your successes. Oh my gosh. How many of you have learned the most from your failures? Right, there we have it. Isn't that ironic? That it's our failures that drive us to the next level. So, in this little talk, it's kind of an intellectual approach at dealing with failure, kind of staring it in the eye. We're dealing with our self-image, our self-esteem, and this is a really complicated package that is part of our makeup as we were growing up and in our past experiences. And I think the physiological components of stress management and so forth have been pretty well dealt with in the media. These are the fight or flight reflexes that we all have. There are certain solutions to these. There's also the way we can control our mind's reaction to stress. And those are also well documented. Visualization, imaging, all sorts of things like that, meditation, so forth. So this is kind of a behavioral look at failure and how we can control it. Here are some tips that I give to my students. And Randy Gardner said the first one this morning. We need to nurture the concept that playing the horn is something we like to do, not who we are. This is very, very important. And I think those of us who suffer from stress management have this problem. We think if we play a successful performance, we're good people. And if we play a lousy performance, we're not good people. And that's obviously not the case. So we have to nurture this with our students, make sure that they understand when we're saying, that doesn't sound very good. We're not saying, you're a lousy person. We're talking about your horn playing here, okay? We're not talking about you as a person. Secondly, I think we need to encourage our students to have the courage to prepare as well as they can before any performance. Typically, you'll have a strong student that 1 or 2 weeks maybe before an audition or performance, that person will come in unprepared. And this is pretty common. Why? Well, they're trying to create an excuse. They want to be able to tell their friends, well, I could have played better, but I just didn't have time to prepare, or I was sick, or whatever. So it takes much more courage to feel well and to prepare your best and still go out there and do it. But in those cases, we're going to learn a whole lot more from that experience. Third, to accept our failures as an important part of our learning process. What do we do when we fail? We have two choices. We can quit, or we can learn from our failure and go on. It's a trial and error process. Next, and this is aimed at perfectionists, aim at a good, solid performance, not a perfect one. In Denton, I have the Dallas and Fort Worth, so I can use this analogy value. Let's say Denver and Boulder. Tonight, there are two horn players playing. The horn player playing in Boulder is known to be a perfect player. This person will not miss any notes. It might not be really inspiring music, but it'll be perfect. The horn player playing in Dallas tonight has a reputation for being a great musician, but it could be a clam bake. You just don't know. Who are you going to buy a ticket for? The person in Boulder or in Denver? I would hope you'd say Denver, because you want to be inspired by a great musician. Don't you want to be that person? I think we all do. So again, it takes this courage to go out on stage and try to be the best musician you can be, and not necessarily play perfect, but play a good, solid performance. Next, I think, and this kind of rolls it all together, sums it all up, I think we want to live our lives to the fullest. I mean, we're only here on a short time on the planet, and what are we going to do with this time? It seems like we ought to do something, and therefore we ought to try our best to do our best in everything we do, and to live our life to the fullest. There's a quote from FDR's second inaugural address. I think it's very inspirational, and I read it before concerts. And what I like to do is change all the masculine pronouns to feminine. So let's read it together, okay? It is not the critic who counts, not the woman who points out how the strong woman stumbled or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes short again and again, who knows the great enthusiasm, the great devotions, and spends herself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and at the worst, if she fails, at least she fails while daring greatly, so that her place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.
The Horn Call Podcast is the official podcast of the International Horn Society. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this series are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the International Horn Society. Copyright International Horn Society. Music by Brian K.M.